Well, I've owned this computer for about 6 years, and I've decided to turn it into a Netflix computer that's connected to the home TV. While it's been a good computer, one of the things that's always been a little bit aggravating, or at least for several years, is this. Now you hear that sound? What that sound is, that is the CPU fan. I think over time what's happened is some dust has gotten into the fan mechanism, and it grinds a while, and at some point it finally shuts up and goes smoothly. In any case, it's time to replace it. So what I purchased is, I've purchased the Cooler Master Hyper 212 EVO, or EVO, I guess it's pronounced EVO. And so we're going to replace the original fan that was in this computer with this fan here. One of my small concerns is the physical size of this replacement fan. Let's turn this off in the meantime. Okay, that was quite a racket. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace this with this Cooler Master fan, and as you can see, it is a somewhat large fan. This part sits on the CPU, this little section here, and the rest of it stands off. And so one of my main concerns is there going to be enough space inside the case to actually fit this? We'll find out soon enough. So the one thing I did way back when was I replaced the original screws with these nylon thumb screws. And so what this does is it makes it very quick and simple to remove the sides of the fan. And in this case, I have to remove, I have to be able to get to the back of the motherboard because there's some bracing that I have to use. All right, so here's this computer. It's a fairly basic computer, and you can see that the size of the cooling fan is somewhat dwarfed by the new Cooler Master. And we'll put it on its side to do our work. All right, removing the old fan is fairly simple. Well, you know what? I'm going to pull this one power cord because it's just in the way and it doesn't need to be there while we work. Oh, before you do anything, obviously, unplug your computer. Otherwise, you can end up getting quite a nasty shock, and who knows, you might short out a key component of the computer and render it unusable. So with this computer, it uses a clip-on fan. So to remove the old fan, you simply flick that and it lifts off. We'll have to twist it a little bit because there's still some of the thermal paste on here. Or they call it grease, but we'll call it paste. There we are. Twist it, turn it off. You can see the remnants of the old paste, and there's just a small 4-pin plug. So that comes off. I think but I know that I definitely applied too much. So let's remove that old paste. I always go with the simplest method. One of the things that I think works very well for a variety of purposes is plain old lighter fluid. Remember, you always apply it to the tissue, not to the whatever object you want to remove it from, unless it's like a glass jar and you're removing some of that obnoxious adhesive. What's nice about lighter fluid is that it evaporates fairly quickly and leaves no residue. And how do I know this? I do a lot of camera work and camera repair, I guess I should say, and so I know that it is safe for electronics. Okay, so one of the questions that might come up is, why do you even need a cooling fan? Why can't the CPU just sit there as is and run without cooling? Well, the reason is because as computers have gotten ever faster, the faster they run, sort of like car engines, the hotter they get. And so each generation of CPUs has gotten faster and faster, which increases the amount of energy that it draws, but also the amount of heat that it produces. So in the old days, you would just allow the heat to sort of dissipate. Early on, you would have heat sinks that you could apply or affix to the CPU. These days, actually, a heat sink isn't enough, so you have a heat sink. In this case, you have a heat sink with a fan. And if you look at the old one, it's the same concept. You have a heat sink, aluminum heat sink, and a fan. If you compare the two side by side, you'll see that the new one, the heat sink, is much beefier, has a lot more fins, a lot more cooling power compared with the old one. And of course, the size of the fan, there's no contest. The Cooler Master comes with, in addition to the fan and the heatsink assembly, it comes with some instructions, your warranty information. see, here's your user manual, and it's a multi-language user manual. It also comes with its thermal paste. It comes with several braces, some spacers, and a bunch of connectors. So hopefully everything is here, and it looks like it is. I don't see any blank spaces in the box here. Now how this works is you have a back plate that goes on the back of the motherboard, and if you'll notice, it's a little shiny. And what this is this is a non-conductive surface. So if it happens to touch any metal, it won't short out any parts of the motherboard. So this goes on the back of the motherboard, and you secure it to the motherboard using these small little screws. Well, not these, but these in fact. So motherboard sits on top of this. These screws go through, and then what you have is it secured by these. Each of these has a nut. See? So we'll attach this, and then at the end, this bracket then will attach to this bracing on the back. And so in effect, your fan isn't really held by the weight of being connected to the CPU, which is good, because otherwise it would just pull it right out. Rather, it's secured by the entire bracing. All right, so let's go ahead and attach this, and we'll be right back. Okay, so at long last I've been able to attach the bracket, and so then I need to figure out exactly how I'm going to orient the fan. I don't know that I have that many choices because of the way the bracing works. So this actually fits inside a bit like this. I think there's a guide pin. There's a guide pin in it, and you can see it right here. That means the fan will have to go in like so. Or the not the fan, but the heat sink. And as you can see, the heat sink is really close to this drive cable. So for now, I'm just going to pull that SATA cable and just get it out of the way while I'm working. I could remove the drives entirely, but you know what? This has already turned into a big enough operation. Now the way this works, of course, is that this contacts the CPU, and so any heat that's generated is vented off through these pipes up through the cooling fins, where a fan then draws air through the cooling fin and hopefully keeps the CPU cool. There's always a lot of debate about how much of this thermal paste you apply, and the thinking generally is the less the better. But I've also heard that if you just put in a nice little small pea-sized drop and then twist your heatsink back and forth, it will then spread the paste evenly across it, and that seems logical to me. This really doesn't give you any type of indication of how much to use. In fact, here they just have you spreading on a big blob, and I don't think that's correct. So we're not going to spread a big blob. So I have heard that you should just put a small amount right in the center of the CPU, or I guess as close as you can to the center. A little sloppy, but generally I think that's pretty good. All right, now remember, because of this locating pin right here, this really dictates the orientation of the of this being this being your heat sink. All right, so we do that. You see how I'm twisting it back and forth. I don't see any spreading out the sides, which is good, which means I haven't overdone it. Now we're going to take this brace, we'll slip it through. See, the space is a little bit tight here. I probably should remove the video card, but I think I'll be okay without removing it. So as it turns out, it didn't work without me removing the video card, so I had to pull it, which involved pulling this little bracing. And working inside this computer, the space was rather limited. I really didn't want to pull the power supply. I guess in the end I could have, because it would have only meant the removal of 4 screws. And now we'll put all the cards back in. By the way, the CPU in this is an Athlon II running at 3.1 gigahertz. Has 8 megabytes of RAM, has the original 120 gigabyte solid state drive. And on the other side is a traditional spinning Western Digital 500 gigabyte drive for file storage. Now the final job, of course, is to attach the fan, and as I mentioned, the default orientation of the fan is this way. If you're ever wondering, the way these fans always work is the bracing is the side where the air is expelled, and the air is drawn in opposite the bracing. And this should be much improved over the previous CPU fan. And where is that old one? You can see how the old one is much smaller comparatively. Let's wait for a second for the furnace to turn off, then we can demonstrate this. Okay, so the furnace is turned off, so let's turn on this computer. And let's listen to the difference. Much quieter. Now let's replace the side of the case. Side of the case went on, and surprisingly it doesn't make contact with the copper ends of the cooling tubes. That's good news, by the way. Alright, so the cost of this fan was about $21 with a couple of dollars shipping, so it brought it to about $23. However, I'll be getting a $10 rebate, so the total cost to me is going to be about $13. That's a pretty good deal. The original cooling fan had cost me, about maybe $16. So for $3 less, 6 years later, this has turned out to be a very good deal. I can't complain. I'm very pleased with the results. Thanks again for watching, and maybe next time we'll do another camera video.